my old high school teacher, Killinger's here again, and I'm going through his notes because he like writes down notes for the podcast, I guess, and they're organized. And there's like, look at this list. There's like at least 50 ideas.
Wow.
And the sections are random podcast shit, Jason, David's weirdness, David's friends, weird Vernon Hills high school stories, surreal post-fame stories, long stories. That's so fucking crazy.
I'll take David
case.
and Jason for 200.
I'll tell you one. My favorite Jason story was at the live show in Chicago when you guys did the podcast there. And I had just walked there from my apartment. I was hanging out with you guys backstage, and you guys were just like coming up with a show, like what you were gonna do as we were backstage, like an hour before what the show was gonna be, right?
Yeah.
It was like. And you guys decided that like Jason was gonna, for one bit, like change into his
Carmelita.
Jesus costume or like change into Carmelita or like back and
right.
forth between those two. And Jason's like, well, I can't do it because I'm not wearing underwear right now. And David was like, no, you've got to do it. Like, I don't care. And Jason's like, I'm not going to get naked, like, right off stage. It has to be a quick change. Like, I'm not just going to be balls out, like, backstage. There's people around there. And you, I mean, you were insistent, David. You were like, you have to do this. Like, this is how this bit is going to go. And Jason's like, all right, well, I'm going to have to borrow your underwear then. And David, you were like, absolutely the fuck not. And then Jason just, like, slowly looks over at me, and he's like, Killinger, can I borrow your underwear? And I wanted to help out. I like in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, you know, sure, no problem. But it was like an August day, and I like just walked there from my apartment. I'm like,
I don't mind.
It was. I'm like, I'm not gonna hand him like my sweaty underpants to change into right now. And so
Jason,
that's kind of an apology to you, but also a hilarious story.
The
like,
thing is, he would literally not have cared. Like,
I don't care.
If they were a little bit sweaty, he'd be like, that's fine. I mean, I'm going to, hey, he'd be like, hey, I'm going to get sweaty in a minute anyway, so who cares? At least you broke him in.
It was just
That's what
As long as we
he
get the bit.
It was just my favorite bit. Just the dead-eyed, like completely serious, looking me like right in the eye. I need to wear your underpants that you're currently wearing right now. I'm like, no, sorry.
Did you end up getting underwear?
I did a few changes, I remember, al fresco.
Oh my
Yeah,
god,
with
that's
no-
fucking nuts.
Yeah, luckily no one saw.
A funny thing, I like how your expectant face right now. No, just that I wrote down this one note about how you seem way more excited to talk with me via text than when I show up someplace. It's so funny because like whenever you're reaching out to me like, oh, David, you know, wants you for this or thanks for doing this, it's all like exclamation points and like. And
That's so Natalie.
You respond with hearts to everything, and then like it's so funny because sometimes I'll show up someplace and I'll be like all jazzed up, like, oh yeah, everybody's having a good time, like Natalie's gonna be excited to see me, and it's always just like, oh hey, Killinger. I'm like, oh okay, I guess that's how it is.
That's so funny. Yeah,
You're a
you,
little deadpan.
you do that, Natalie. What is that?
I know, I do that. I text like a crazy person. Like, I am a completely different person when I text people. 'Cause
That's so funny. That is such a Natalie thing. And
is
then when
really
you get there, hey, Killinger. It's like she's just like a shell, just like walking around like
Totally,
empty.
and
like,
I'm
I
especially
have to text fun for my job. Did you get my fun text? Make sure to tell David they were extra fun.
I think that I'm fun. Like, I think that I'm like that, and I type that way. But then when I'm in person, I'm not that way.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're no fun in person.
I'm a piece of boring shit. Yeah.
Speaking of shit, how big are your shits? Okay. Is there ever a student that you taught that you just hated or you don't like? Or
there's one student that comes to mind where I just won't like if I saw him in person, I would just ignore him, as opposed to
Wow,
like every other student I would like
you won't
be
forgive
super
him?
excited. No,
It's been years.
So the story with that is that when I was the journalism teacher, I would take kids on field trips every year to like journalism conventions that were like national things. So like every high school in the country would
A
like
journalism convention.
Yeah, high school journalism conventions. They were a great time. And so I took kids to Boston this one year. Like, so we were there. It was like the second day. We were there for 3 days. We woke up on the morning of the second day, and I'm trying to get everybody together in the lobby of the hotel in Boston. And I'm like counting heads, and there's one off. And this one kid comes up to me. I'm going to change to the student's name just for the sake of the story.
Yeah.
This one kid comes up to me and says, "We don't know where Mike is." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? Like, I watched you close the door when you guys went to bed in this hotel room last night, and then now it's the morning. Like, what do you mean you don't know where he is?" And he's like, this kid's like, well, he left last night. He said he was going to go meet some girls, and he didn't come back. And I start losing my mind
God.
because it's in the middle of like downtown Boston, and
Oh my
and we
God.
went to bed like the last event.
And you're
we had.
responsible for every
I'm
student.
responsible, exactly. So I'm like, this kid could be fucking dead, and so I'm having a panic attack. And not only that, but one of the chaperones that I brought with me was my boss, who was in charge of the entire English department.
Yeah.
And I'm like, my boss is watching me like lose a kid and lose my mind. This kid could be fucking dead in an alley somewhere. And so I was losing my shit. I was calling this kid nonstop, and I just went into like a different like mindset where I'm like, I need to track down this kid. If it's his fucking dead body or what, like I don't care. I need to like I'm gonna
I need
get
to bring
fired
an
if I
arm
don't.
back or something.
Right.
Like, I don't care if it's his
like
eyeball.
fingerprints, something exactly.
Yeah,
I need
okay.
something. Eventually, he picks up the phone and he's like super groggy sounding. I'm like, hey man, where the fuck are you? He's like, oh, I guess I slept in. I'm like, that's bullshit because I'm with your 3 fucking roommates. We're in the lobby right now. Like, what are you talking about? And eventually, it's funny that this was at a journalism convention because I was doing like detective work of like, trying to put the pieces together. But I eventually found him. He took a cab to a different hotel to meet up with some girls that he met at the journalism convention. And so like I eventually like I take a cab there. He like eventually tells me where he is. I meet up with him, and I'm like, I'm sitting down with him. I'm like, it looks like I'm happy to see you, but it's only because you're alive. Like, other than that, I'm like at the end of my fucking rope, right? Like, I'm just gonna. I told the story a couple weeks ago about how mad I was in like to a classroom, but this was like the most directed anger at like a single student I've ever had in my life. I'm like, I'm gonna strangle you. I'm like, you're going home immediately. Like, I'm sending one of the chaperones home with you right now. I'm gonna book a flight. I can't fucking trust you to stay here for another night. Like, are you out of your goddamn mind? I heard stories later. It's like, yeah, you know, he hooked up with both girls that were in the room. Like, other students were telling me this. I'm like, listen, man, good for him. If like he pulled off something great. If I were 16 and I could hook up with 2 other girls in another high school, like, good for him. But I also still want to murder him. But like, the repercussions were he had to fly home immediately. I kicked him out of my class.
Wow.
Like, he could not be a newspaper. I'm like, I'm not gonna fucking deal with this kid. Like, look at him every day, like third period, like, oh, you know, what story ideas do you have today? I'm like, get him the fuck out of my class. I never want to look at him again. And and so yeah, that's the kid. Like, I actually did see him one more time. I was on like a lunch break a couple years later, and he was like delivering the food with like a bunch of other teachers. And he comes up and puts all the food down. He's like, oh, hey, Jeff. And I'm like,
Oh my God.
I was like, you know, I was like, hello. And then he walks away, and all the other teachers are like, ooh, Jeff. I'm like, any other student could call me Jeff, and I wouldn't lose it. But like, that fucking kid, I'm Mr. Killinger for life to that kid, because I could have murdered him and should have. But
Did he get a punishment when he got back to school?
Yeah, I think, I forget what it was. It was some kind of suspension. I think he was out of school for like maybe a week or something. Cause
Wow,
like,
I would have, if I was in your shoes, I wouldn't have handled it that well.
It was so
I
much
wouldn't
of
have
it.
known to send him home.
Yeah. I mean, that was my only option.
I feel like that's something that I would have done on a field trip, and I don't think I would have gotten a detention or gotten kicked back on the trip.
You think you would have got away
Well,
with it?
that's
I
because
think I
you're
would've gotten
the.
away with
Yeah,
it.
right, Dave. You sleep with 2 chicks? I doubt it.
That part was probably not it. That's probably going to meet up with some guys to play video games. But so high schools are known for their boys and their boners. I know this sounds weird, but I feel like there's
Whoa.
No, hold on.
What an intro.
I know it's an intro.
Welcome back on Boys and Boners. I'm Dave Dobrik.
I just know that there have been a lot of times when I was in high school, actually more in middle school too, where like there was a boner that I did not ask for, and I was having to cover it up, and I was like, does anybody else see what's going on here? Were there ever situations?
I've got a couple funny stories about
You got
that.
a couple of dicks you remember?
2 very memorable. No, so my wife was a teacher too, and I think she came back from work one day and was like, this kid, I was, had this activity all planned, and I was getting like supervised by my boss, and I wanted the kids to get around and like move around the classroom and do this activity, and
to
like
the
one
whiteboard,
kid wasn't getting up, right?
Yeah, he I couldn't get him up to the whiteboard, and
Oh my God, this is like such a movie incident. This is like such a movie thing where like a kid doesn't want
Yeah.
to go up to the whiteboard because he's a boner.
Yeah.
and so
I'd rather not.
But like I didn't know, so I told him about this, and Jeff was like, "Oh, Leah, you can't just like ask people to come up to the whiteboard. Like if a boy says no, like there's a reason." Like I didn't
Oh, that's like a rule in teacher code?
No,
So it isn't.
I didn't know as a woman, and he had to explain this to his female colleagues as well. I didn't know that boys just like pop boners for whatever reason. Like I thought it was like in response to like a sexual stimuli.
So that's the
and-
thing. When you're 13, like almost anything is a sexual stimuli.
And that's what he kept saying. He's like, no, I just pop boners for no reason. And that was like fascinating to
No,
me.
that happens too. You get boners for no reason. There's no sexual stimuli.
Right.
Sometimes you're like not even horny and it's just hard.
When you're a kid?
Yeah. Or
100
now or ever. Yeah. I remember being in class and being like, I'm not horny, but it's fucking rock
Yeah,
hard.
but at a kid, when you're like younger, it's like a lot more. Like the boners would come every period.
Yeah,
Like,
but it wasn't like I was turned on by anything. It was just there.
I know. Yeah, I was learning about like the Great Pilgrimage.
We're here on Boys and Boners. So we're taking your calls.
Oh, so when you were a teacher, if a guy didn't want to come up to the board,
I got it. I
wait, that's
understand.
happened. Has that ever happened to you?
It happened a couple times, and I had to explain it to my female colleagues as well, like because they would complain about boys. I'm like, you can't. It's yeah, like this is
Wow,
just
that's so
it's gonna happen.
interesting.
If a kid is like sitting in his chair like with terror in his eyes that he doesn't want to get up, just let him fucking
I would
vibe for a few
always.
minutes.
It's so weird. I would always get boners at the most inconvenient time, and it was right before passing period.
Yes.
It was
Yes.
right.
Yes, dude, totally.
It was right when it was right when the bell was about to ring, and I was about to go to my next. I was about to go to my next class.
Yes.
And sometimes I would flip my backpack and I'd wear it on my stomach.
Totally.
Yeah, or at the time they had like these binders. Remember those binders that
Hell yeah.
like they're like made out of like a fabric and you put everything in it?
And
like
you just
remember?
jam it against your pants to try.
Yeah, and that was just I remember that was the horror for me. When I was a kid, I was like, "Oh my god, boners are going to be like a serious problem my entire life." Like it was like the same fear I had about like quicksand. Like when they teach you about quicksand, you're like, "Okay, got to watch out for those when I go hiking." Like that's not a fucking fear.
Yeah.
And boners and skunks. This is another. I saw this. It was a funny tweet, and like someone was like, "When I was a kid, I thought skunks were going to be a way bigger problem." And that's the same thing with boners. I was like, "Dude, I'm going to fucking pop boners when I'm older, like during meetings." But they do go away.
Dude,
And sometimes, they're even hard to get now. Sometimes I wish I was younger. All right, guys, that's all the time we have for today's podcast. Thank you guys for listening. Have a happy and safe Thanksgiving. Jason, any tips for people celebrating with their families? How to do it safely?
Just when you go to dinner with your family, don't say anything. Just be silent the entire time and try to get it out there as quick as possible.
Yeah. And especially if there's somebody there like that's getting boned. And especially if your ex-wife is there and she's getting boned by her new boyfriend and he's there too, make sure to keep your mouth shut.
Yeah.
And just be extra careful.
I'm going to wear headphones through dinner. So.
So he can't hear him have sex in the kitchen. All right. That's it. We'll see you guys later. My name is Jeff. Bye.